recognize Mr. Cloud from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate you holding this hearing. And I especially want to thank Ms. Turner, Ms. McNabb for being here and telling your stories, not only coming before Congress and talking to us, which is bold and heroic in its own right, but taking the stand that you've taken, and for Ms. McNabb for continuing to tell your story. I am sorry that you've been put in this type of situation where you're at a critical moment in our history where this is an issue that we're having to deal with. But I admire you for your courage and thank you for being there. As a committee, we're bringing this up in part because of the Ted Stevens Act that Mr. Leafield mentioned. The U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee is a congressionally chartered entity under that act, and the USOPC, therefore, and its NGB derivatives, the National Governing Boards, have to abide by federal law. And so we have Title IX, which says that these organizations will not discriminate based on sex. And then we have lately executive orders where President Trump issued an executive order keeping men out of women's sports. He did this to rescind the funds from educational institutions that deprive women and girls of their fair athletics opportunities, and to oppose male competitive participation in women's sports more broadly for safety, fairness, dignity, and truth. It's interesting to note that he referenced in that a previous Executive Order 14168, in which defined a female, which it seems that the left has a very difficult time doing, a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the large reproductive cell. And so we have a pretty clear definition of the guidelines that you should be operating by and other organizations that are embracing sports and chartered by. And so it does fall under our jurisdiction as Congress to consider whether or not you and these other organizations should be stripped of your certification under the Ted Stevens Act. And so we have to continue to look at this and just talk about this issue. A recent UN report that the chairwoman mentioned notes that as of March 2024, over 600 female athletes in more than 400 competitions had lost 890 medals, 29 different sports, to males, explicitly concluding that males have certain performance advantages in sports, which Ms. Graves seems to not agree with. This report also notes that injuries have included knocked out teeth, concussions resulting in neural impairment, broken legs, and skull fractures. And it boggles the mind, Ms. Graves, that time and time again what we have is mediocre male athletes turning into champions in women's sports, and you continue to think that there's not an advantage. I'm puzzled by that.
Is that a question?
How do you?
Yeah, well, first I just have to say the idea that someone who identifies as a man would instead live their entire life as a woman.
That's not answering the question. Is how a mediocre competitor becomes a champion overnight. Did they have
the notion is?
I'll move on.
Sort of absurd.
If you were to compare world-class world record times in track for women's sports compared to the male Texas high school meet that happened just recently, you would find that the male high schoolers beat world record times virtually in every single race as female world-class record holders throughout history. As someone who ran track in the past, I wonder if I can retroactively identify and be recertified as a world-class world champion as opposed to the mediocre track person that I was.
Because that's not how the rules work, and I think that's part of what I've been trying to explain here.
I wanted to ask you something, Ms. Leafield, because the press release from U.S. Fencing talked about how you came up with your site selection criteria, which the chairwoman talked to, but I wanted to dig into it a little bit because it says your source for analysis was primarily the equality maps, the Movement Advance Project. Now, this is not, if you go to this site right now, what you would find on its homepage is a bunch of voting turnout information, how we could advance leftist, Marxist agenda, primarily Democrat agenda all throughout the country. There's maps to do it, ways to be engaged, all these kind of things. This is not at all any sort of nonpartisan sporting effort or anything along those lines. And one thing DOJ has uncovered has been the fact that all these NGOs have been funded, and thank you, Madam Chairman.
Okay.
I apologize, I ran out of time. But the point is it's a political organization, not any sort of nonpartisan.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Lynch from Mass.